Well, a very good morning to you, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening to this webinar, either live or via your favorite streaming service. Welcome to International Coach Week. My name is Natalie Ashdown from Open Door Coaching. I am overly excited, I've already shared this, to introduce you to a very special keynote speaker today, Professor Andrea Ellinger from the University of Texas in Tyler. And you'll be able to read Andrea's bio online on our blog. I just want to point out that Andrea's been working in this area for over 30 years. I am a huge fan because she is an academic master in the area and has been recognized as such. And I, in my doctorate studies, have been printing out every single paper that she's ever written, and I have marked them all up. And today we're going to have the amazing opportunity to learn from Andrea about her experience in the coaching industry and around research. And we're going to be talking about the exemplar beliefs and behaviors of exemplar coaches as well. Andrea, welcome to the line. Thank you for joining us this evening from Alabama.
Thank you very, very much, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever our colleagues are. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And before I begin, we always start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we're always all meeting today, and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. And wherever you might be dialing in from, we acknowledge the international Indigenous elders that might be on the line as well. We pay our respects to them and to elders past, present, and emerging. So as I mentioned today, we're going to be talking about a number of different topics. I want to get straight into it and hand over to you, Andrea. And I want to start by acknowledging you first for all the work you have done in researching and working in this area for over the past 30 years. I mentioned the papers, and perhaps some of you might be able to see my highly marked up multiple copies of the papers and the journals that you've written. And on this paper in particular, the one that we might even start with, I've got a star across the top and it says very important article. And there's only a few articles that I have that have got big stars and circles and things like that. So it's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you. And perhaps we can hand over to you, because what I'm interested in is over the last 30 years, perhaps the major changes that you've seen in the industry and in workplaces over that time.
Okay, well, first I'd like to extend my very heartfelt thank you to you, Natalie, because when you emailed me, your email was so lovely. And when you were telling me about, reading articles, I responded and thought, geez, are they good for putting people to sleep at night? They're a good inducing mechanism. And she said, no, no, no. And I typically always am a little hesitant sometimes, to do these kinds of sessions because technology usually doesn't work so well now that I'm retired and I don't have all of the bells and whistles associated with my former university. But I couldn't resist, and I printed the email and saved it for posterity. It was really lovely, and I'm delighted. I was actually delighted to know that people read the research and it's helpful. And I'd also like to extend a very warm heart. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone that's joining me also online, or maybe even if you're somehow physically present in some way or all remote. And I have to tell you, Natalie did share some of the questions that she was going to pose just so I could get my brain whirling around a little bit and think about them. The first one, and it's interesting because in our email exchange, I told Natalie that this month, and not too far away, I'll be celebrating a milestone birthday, and I'll be 60. And it was interesting. I hadn't really thought about the 30-60 view because, 30 years is a long time. And I hadn't really actually counted until I actually started thinking about this and kind of thinking about where I began and how I began. And I want to share a little bit of that perspective. But I suppose none of what I'm going to tell you is necessarily new. For example, when I think about the changes that I've seen, I mean, gosh, when I began my doctoral studies in 1994 at the University of Georgia, I was there for 3 years and completed the work. I mean, we had very limited internet. We had very, very limited email. When we went to the library, we physically went to a physical building and we went up and down the stacks, pulling out physical copies of journals. I mean, there were landlines, voicemail, a standard television, the vinyl records. I don't know if you can see, I'm broadcasting from my kitchen, and my husband and I collect picture discs. So we still have a lot of vinyl in the house, cassettes, CDs. I would tell my students some of this, and they'd look at me like I was insane because they hadn't even heard of some of these things. We use cameras, and then over time, I can remember my original first flip phone, and then the personal device assistants, and my YouTube BlackBerry, which was really fun. And then, over time, how many versions of iPhones are we on? I don't even know what mine is, 13, 14, I'm not sure. Over the years, Skype was introduced, kind of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other platforms have kind of replaced and actually enhanced some of this ability to connect remotely using technology. Think about all the WhatsApp, all the social media platforms, the driverless cars, and even now intriguing is all of the AI, which has been under development. It's not necessarily new, but all the generative AI that's now at our fingertips, and how it's impacting our working lives, the design of work, how workers are sourced for work, and a whole host of other areas. So I think about just the technology changes, and I'm really a neophyte when it comes to technology, but I think about what I used to teach with in the classroom and what teaching involves now, and it's very different, infused with technology, which also then makes me think about the nature of workers in the workplace. Now it's possible to work anywhere, anytime, using technology as part of our work tech tools. I was talking with a couple of people and they're full-time employed, but they have side hustles. So they do separate jobs, kind of like gig workers, or they call them their side hustles. Then I was attending a session last week, and the estimates here anyway in the United States are that contingent workers or external workers coming into organizations can range anywhere from 30 to 50% of the workforce. So we have a lot of shifts in the nature of work and how it's being done, who's doing it. And so those are huge issues, I think, that that impact how organizations work, who leads them, how managers operate, etc. The other thing that I think is interesting, and I was reflecting on this as well, is I remember back in, maybe 2008, 2009, two of my very dear colleagues and I started thinking about this. We were seeing, a couple coaching journals coming out. We were hearing a lot about the professional coaching industry. I read a lot about, coaching from Anthony Grant, who was wonderful. I met him in Dublin many, many years ago at a conference when I was new to the profession. And, thinking about the profession of coaching or the professional coach industry was really intriguing to us, because as people who are part of the human resource development field, we were kind of thinking a lot of our colleagues aren't really focused on this. They, we don't live in a silo. And this is going to be interesting. So we wrote about it, and we kind of thought, gosh, there's a lot of similarities between what could be a coaching profession along with human resource development, organizational change and development. And now when I think about where we are in 2024, and I look at all the reports that the International Coaching Federation has come up with, and the Chartered Institute of Personal Development reports, I mean, the number of people practicing as professional coaches is always increasing. The billions of dollars spent on professional coaching continues to increase. So to me, it has emerged, it's proliferating, and it's maturing. And I think that the research on a lot of different genres of coaching is also maturing. And then for me personally, I think, and I'll share a few stories about how I got into my topic in a little bit, but I think there's a growing expectation, and it's been growing over the years, but it's ongoing. And I think a lot of people in the workplace want to be developed. They want their managers and their leaders to help them grow and develop. And so I think that resonates very nicely with what I like to study and what I've been passionate about. Although I must admit, I've never been a practicing coach and not a certified coach, as many of you are. I've come at it, kind of got into it professionally in terms of my academic role. But these are kinds of some of the things I'm thinking of. And as I said, I went to a wonderful summit last week, a virtual summit that MIT Sloan Management School put forth. And it was fascinating to think about AI in the context of where everything's going. So I've been really intrigued with some of these ideas. And what does this mean for work? What does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for managers, employees? So those are still thoughts that are whirling around in my head, and things that I want to learn more about. But that's kind of, these are the things I'm seeing, and kind of doing a retrospective about where I was 30 years ago and where I am today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Andrea. And I was musing to myself when you mentioned that you had to go to the library and actually pull out the journals. And I was just thinking to myself now, I I was again with your research papers. I'm like, oh, Andrea's written something else. I think I might just download that. So I just, you pop on the academic
I know.
databases and you have at your fingertips the access to all of the research, all of the wisdom, everything that came before us, and then for you to have to go to the library and do that, I can't even imagine. So,
Oh, yeah,
yes,
I was a very skillful photocopier back in the
yeah,
day.
indeed, indeed. And it's amazing to talk to you as you say that because you were there when the industry actually emerged, and being in the US as well. Australia was a little bit after you. Our industry didn't really start to emerge until say the early 2000s, but you were there in the earlier days, which it's wonderful to talk to you and hear your reflections from that perspective as well. And you were going to talk to us about your inspiration for your passion behind coaching, behind your research. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
Sure. As I said, I began actually when I graduated from college back in 1986. One of my first jobs was with a technology company. Believe it or not, I was actually much more capable then than I perhaps am now. But I worked in the manufacturing industry, and I often reflect on why I got into my dissertation topic, and what was really the key idea behind my thinking and my interest was that my own personal experiences of having a developmental manager or managers over the course of a couple of different companies when I was an employee was not really there. And I was really intrigued by this. And a couple of quick stories just to give you a sense of where I was coming from. As a new salesperson, I think I was probably 22 years old, and I was working in the aerospace and defense industry. So I had a lot of big manufacturing sites that I was visiting. And on one particular occasion, my sales manager said, I want to ride with you. We're going to spend a day in the field. We can help you. It can, provide feedback, guidance, really, I can watch you, do all of your sales work. And ultimately, when we're driving and I was driving and he was in the passenger seat, he fell asleep. And I thought to myself, this is really awkward. My manager is supposed to be helping me, a core role of a sales manager, sales coaching, and he should really be helping me kind of prepare, think through what I'm going to do, how we're going to engage with the customer and client, all this. And I look over and he's sleeping. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay. I must not be the sparkling company he was hoping for, but I remember just thinking, wow, this is my manager and he's sleeping. And then, when I also concurrently began my master's degree, because I do love to learn and I will always love to learn. So I started my master's degree currently when I was working. And I remember the company was going to pay for it. I had to put the money out first and then they would, reimburse me. But as I was nearing the end of my degree, and my degree coursework had to be kind of tailored to my, manufacturing environment and background in order for the company to pay for it and think it was relevant, I said to my manager, the same one that fell asleep, I said, I'm really learning some cool stuff here. And if we can have a department meeting, I only need like an hour to share some really interesting things with our colleagues, which might actually help us in our sales work. And he looked at me like I was insane. He saw no value in that at all. And I thought that was really amazing to me. I thought you're paying for my master's degree and you're getting no benefit. And I could actually literally share if you create a context for me to do that. And then I shifted gears and I went into a very different industry. I went into the social expression industry, from the people that care the very best. You probably know who I'm talking about. And one of my managers, we sat down for the annual performance review, And, I'm thinking, okay, I'm relatively, new here. I'm probably going to get, an articulation of my strengths, weaknesses, where I can, kind of further develop. And the only thing he said to me is, your handwriting's too small. So based
Oh,
upon those experiences, and I liked all the managers, but it made me think, there is no development here. And the only development you got really was your formalized training at the organizations, and also your formal education in pursuing your graduate degree. So, various serendipitous events led me and my husband to go to Georgia. He started his doctoral program, and then I began a year after he did. And I kind of probably have these two bullet points reversed, but my exposure to Karen Watkins at the time really was intriguing to me, because her work was focused on informal workplace learning with Victoria Marsick, a wonderful collaborator of hers, and on the learning organization. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to work in an organization that really focuses on optimizing learning and valuing learning, and maybe having leaders that actually facilitate learning. So that kind of got me started, and she got me connected with a project. And I remember this project was for a large automotive engineering organization, and they were using a cascaded training approach where they would ask the senior managers to train the next level below them of managers all the way down this organization on certain engineering techniques. And they wanted us to do a survey, and we had to design the survey. But in the time of designing the survey, I happened to be taking a qualitative research class, and I thought, okay, maybe I can tie this project with my qualitative class assignment, and maybe they'd allow me to interview a few of these managers and a few employees experiencing this cascaded training and event and activity intervention, I should say, really. And when I did, and I said, just randomly pick whoever. I'm not going to give you any criteria. I just want to interview X number of managers who are supposedly serving as trainers, and X number of employees who are supposedly serving, being the recipients of this training. And it was fascinating, and it was a really big thing for me to, to dovetail this with my qualitative research class, is the varied perspective. That's not my role. My role isn't to train people. That's human resources role. My role and my job is to design cars. That's what I do. To another manager totally on the other end of the spectrum that would say, of course, that's exactly what I'm supposed to do. If I actually develop my people, we'll have better designed cars. And it was just amazing to me that there could be this disparity in people thinking about what is it that they're supposed to be doing regarding helping developing their employees. And I actually remember from one employee, she said, I don't really need my manager to be a formal trainer, but what I'd really expect my manager to do is to create a supportive learning environment for me, so that I'm comfortable learning and I'm comfortable sharing what I'm learned. And that's when the light bulb went on. And I thought, okay, I think I know what my topic's going to be, because I'm really, really interested in organizations that value and are committed to learning. So looking at organizations that were espoused to be learning organizations, being on the path to becoming learning organizations, were kind of my target. And then, because I really didn't have developmentally focused managers when I was an employee, I thought, I really want to learn from the exemplars. I want to see and talk to the best of the best. And I want to know how they actually facilitate the learning of their employees. So using critical incident technique and collecting, I think, just shy of 60 incidents from 12 managers across 4 different organizations, I got some very, very wonderful stories that were told to me. And then it was the analysis of the stories that allowed me to create what I considered, in a way, a behavioral taxonomy. And even though it's considered facilitation of learning, and that's how I framed it, in terms of asking them, how did you really, help your employees learn? And what did you do? And why did you do it? And, what would you do again? How would you do it differently? And, a whole series of questions. Invariably they would look at me and say, I coached them. And I'm like, okay, so in a way, synonymously, you're using the facilitator of learning terminology with coaching. And then that got me into more of the coaching literature, but Oscar Mink and Barbara Mink and one of their colleagues really talked about a very developmental approach to coaching, where learning is kind of the focus of it, and then the performance becomes a byproduct of what's learned. So not this like necessarily performance-driven coaching mentality, but a really developmentally inspired coaching to really get at the heart of learning, and then performance improvements and growth and development occurs from that. So that's kind of how I got into this whole thing, and then kind of have spent my time immersed in, different parts of this, looking at different aspects, not only behaviors, beliefs, kind of broadening out things, looking at impact, efficacy, looking at relationships, between coaching and managerial coaching in particular with other outcomes, and then watching my students kind of further progress the work.
Thank you for sharing. It's lovely to hear that background. And what occurred to me as you were talking also, Andrea, is that you had that dissonance. You knew that what was happening in your work environment wasn't right for you, was in fact odd. And then I'm so pleased that you shared the story about how you found the perspectives and the people and the research subjects also that were in line with what you, by the sounds of it, already intuitively knew as well. So it felt like you intuitively knew this, and then you found the tribe or the people or those that were on a similar path and journey to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of the questions we have come from the everyday things we see and we experience, and we can't answer them. And so even though I'm not necessarily a professional coach, my interest in coaching kind of became an interest because I didn't see a lot of it happening. And I wanted to know more. And I didn't even know the terminology of coaching away at that time before I, got into graduate school. So I just think it was a natural progression of exactly what you said, my experiences, and then finding a perfect home to research this.
Yes, absolutely. And I will take you back to that research, if you don't mind, Andrea, the work you did with Dr. Robert Bostrom. And it really was, it's cited by everybody that does research in the area, including me. It really was one of the first papers to give insights into the beliefs and the behaviors of managers who coach. And as you say, you describe them as the facilitators of learning. So perhaps you could share, and everything that you've written is so relevant to today. Everyone on the line would be relating to what you say in terms of coaches are facilitators of learning, we're facilitators of development. My research says that that coaches are people who want to grow and learn and empower and develop people. And they also have a willingness to coach as well. So those attributes that you found those years ago are still very alive and present. They're present in our ICF core competencies as well. So I wonder, though, would you mind taking us back to what you found back then in terms of the facilitation of learning?
Okay. So I had a mass of transcripts, and as I analyzed them, and it was quite an interesting process. I'm sure there are better tools today, but this was the old manual approach where literally, as I was going through transcripts, I was identifying the content and actually adhering it to file cards, and just literally having masses of file cards and sorting and sorting and resorting and capturing every sort. So kind of in a way, manually doing some kind of a process that now, in vivo and other software tools can more easily do. But what became very kind of clear to me is that, and I must say, Bob Bostrom's a dear friend, and he was wonderful. He was a management information professor at Georgia, and he was on my committee. So he was very inspiring and very helpful to me in thinking about this, because I do recall at one point, I was generally pretty independent, but I remember bringing a transcript to him, and then we sat outside at a lovely, on the Georgia campus, and he said, "Well, what are you finding?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm not thinking I have a lot." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, this is what I have." And he looks at the transcript. He starts reading a couple of pages. He says, "You got a gold mine here." And he actually helped me to see the gold mine, because I wasn't really sure. And so as I was going through this, he sharpened, he gave me one or two examples of, okay, like you highlighted this, and I know this is, let's talk about this. This is fascinating stuff. And he was so excited that I got excited. And just that excitement and that encouragement really helped me to go and really look very carefully at the data and kind of think about, how am I going to sort this? Because the goal was to really kind of come up with a behavioral taxonomy, if you will, that would describe kind of the micro behaviors that exemplary managers, as facilitators of learning, or what they purposely called themselves as coaches, actually did. And there were really two big clusters: an empowering cluster, and a lot of the empowerment we can see in other number of models that have also come out since this, and then a facilitating cluster. So if you look at these particular behaviors, I mean, honestly, when I was looking at, I was reflecting on Beth's work, and Beth Adil, we might talk about in a little while, has a couple of wonderful tables that were created that really capture a lot of the different behaviors of models of behavior and coaching behavior, particularly from managerial coaching perspective, and also instruments and kind of some of the nuts and bolts of the instruments. So there's a lot of resonance and a lot of consistency across. But the notion of question framing, asking questions that really promote thinking and promote ownership, not just giving somebody an answer, but really saying, hey, why? What do you think? Or, just really prompting someone to really think about and actually think through things in such a way that they can start to frame their own solutions. Another one being a resource, removing obstacles, making sure you give people resources to do the work that they need to do. Transferring ownership to employees, maybe a little hint of delegating there, but letting people just take ownership for their own work. And another one, and I can remember a couple of examples, managers saying to me, a very senior management information VP said, I've done this 1,000 times. It would be so much easier if I did it myself, but then this person would never, ever learn. So I had to consciously hold myself back and not provide any of the answers, but work in a very open, developmental way. He said it took hours and hours working with this person, but the rewards of seeing her actually learn something and be in a position to do this work herself made it so worthwhile. So even if you think you know a solution, just not letting that solution come forward, letting the employees or the coachee derive their own solution. And then, of course, feedback is core to most models, providing feedback, and I think how it's provided in a respectful manner, in an open manner, and then also soliciting feedback from employees. Talking about the feedback and getting a sense if they're resonating with it, if they're conflicted by it, or how they're feeling about it. But so it's kind of a give take. It's a two-way kind of path there. This one was really hard to operationalize, so it really never featured in the scale that my colleagues and I developed, because it was called working it out together, just talking things through. And I can think of one particular manager who said, I just happened to drop in and I was watching one of my employees present something. And I saw a couple things that I thought, perhaps it would be really good to offer a little guidance. And he said, so I just sent a little note and said, hey, would you be open to some feedback? And sure, I am. And then he said, we just sat down and we started talking things through, not only about the feedback, but other things. And it was like having a conversation that really kind of broadened things out. So it's kind of having a very, very nice conversation in give and take. A couple of other ones that surfaced were creating and promoting a learning environment, which is really important. And how managers did that were interesting. Some required their employees to work in other functional units of the organization so they could actually experience what work is like from different perspectives. Some of them, had their employees create agendas and create new topics so that everyone could learn something every month at a departmental meeting or some kind of a gathering. Another one always had some kind of a summit where everyone would come together and they'd share their key learnings. That was, an auditing VP. Another huge one is setting and communicating expectations. That's probably pretty consistent with other models as well, but helping people understand where they fit in the big picture. And I can remember one manager, speaking about this, and most employees kind of have their what they're required to do, and they do it. But sometimes what's even more helpful to them is if they actually know how what they do contributes to the work and the responsibilities and the overall success of the organization. And then that ties things together for them in ways that they hadn't anticipated. There might be a little bit more ownership, but people need to understand. You just can't, set out here, you do these 5 things and not have them understand why are these 5 things really, really important. And if I don't do these 5 things, what happens? If I do them, what happens, etc. Stepping into other to shift perspective was really like encouraging people to, in a way, and I use the perhaps the analogy of stepping into somebody else's shoes. And one story that comes to mind is a manager, a fairly VP level manager, had called in one of his more senior managers because the senior manager was proposing a reorganization of his unit. And the VP listened and he said, from what you told me, I'm just going to, share something with you. You're actually kind of rearranging people's jobs. And in some instances, you're demoting them. And your plan to invite them to the meeting where you announce this new structure and they learn of their demotion is probably not going to be a good thing. And this man just, had no understanding. He was like not even aware. He was so focused on the restructure, he kind of forgot about the human elements of it. And he said, I want you to imagine that you're this person who's going to be at this meeting and hearing that their job is no longer what they think it is and how that's going to look and what they might feel if this is communicated in front of everyone. And he said when he did that, it was like the senior manager kind of stood back and said, God, I hadn't even thought about these things. I was so focused on the doing and the restructure. I didn't even think about the elements. So just getting somebody to kind of empathize and be in someone else's position. Again, broadening employees' perspective, getting them to see things differently. That is interesting because one of the senior managers would in a service related organization, she had everybody work in different departments. She would rotate people. She would actually have them assume different job roles in other cross functional units just so they could get a sense of, what would it be like to be this person when you're asking for this information, or what would it be like to, have to deal with customers that aren't necessarily satisfied with what we're doing. So that was her approach. And other examples, I've written about and they kind of appear in the papers, using analogies, scenarios, and examples. Bringing up experiences by sharing little stories and these kinds of things, engaging others to facilitate learning. I can think of a couple where one manager said, I don't think I'm getting through. I really don't. And I feel bad because this person needs to understand the feedback that could fundamentally be holding them back in their job and ultimately could maybe even result in them losing their job. So this person organized the employee to actually go to an assessment center, so that this person could actually get a sense of more feedback from someone totally independent that might be more receptive and receiving. So these were kind of the core behaviors, but in order to execute these behaviors, I was intrigued on the why behind it. And that was really interesting. And that's kind of where some of the big the belief materials that Bob and I also published were kind of communicated. And again, Beth does a beautiful job in organizing in one of her papers that we wrote together very recently. Belief research is not widely done in the managerial coaching sphere, but there are some studies, and we've referenced them. There might be more, and I don't claim to have, been not missed something recent, but from the time of the publication, we think we have identified most of the studies that have looked at that. And there's a lot of overlap among them, but she does a very nice job of kind of laying them out. And then, of course, she did this also as part of her dissertation research. So we also have that kind of a new set of beliefs, which in many ways kind of corroborate a lot of the beliefs that have been found by myself and a couple of other scholars.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And we'll talk about Beth's research in just a moment,
Sure.
and Andrea. But as you were talking, it struck me that I didn't come into coaching until almost 15 years after this research paper, actually. And I remember the reactions in the market and in the industry and in coaching when I first joined. So, and it was, what's this thing called coaching? So I was actually curious about what was the reaction to the paper and to the new information you were sharing from an academic point of view around the behaviours. What was the reaction you were getting to those thoughts at the time?
Well, it's interesting because I think in the field of human resource development, the research was relatively well received, and I think
Right.
valuable, and from a
Yeah.
managerial perspective. But then I also wondered if some of the venues that we publish, and if they're not as mainstream, will it reach other disciplines? And I
Mm.
often wondered that. I know I was an example of this is I was reviewing a paper for a really nice journal, and they almost pretended that some of the topics were like never researched before, and I was really struck by that. And I thought, I wonder if it's because they're not reading other journals and other sources, because they have a mindset about where good scholarship is and where it has to be published. So I think in the little world that I lived in, and live in, which I think is highly connected to all these other disciplines, I think that people found it useful. And I think from a pragmatic standpoint, I had people that were using it. They were translating the instrument that we developed into other languages, doing research on it. I got calls from various practitioners. Can I use this? Can I use your survey? It was interesting. I had a law firm call me. They were doing some professional development, and they wanted to, use the survey, so they could have their employees assessed to the extent that they were receiving coaching from members in the law firm. So I'd like to think it has helped people, and in those in practice, because again, I was working with people in practice,
Yes.
helping me to understand their practice, which was exemplary practice for me at the time to learn about and why they did it. And then in a way translating that, and through these journal venues that hopefully other practitioners and other researchers and other professionals could use. And you never really know if they use it. I guess you can look at, do people cite the work? Do they read the work? Do they fall asleep while they're reading the work? What do they do with it? So I can only hope that it's been helpful. And I suppose from my perspective, I'm delighted that I had doctoral students that were really fascinated with the topic and wanted to continue lines of research. And so for me, that's the passion, that they could see value and want to extend it in ways that at the time I didn't. I knew where the pathways could go, but I didn't have all the resource horsepower to do it. But I had a lot of advisees, and they kind of came up with cool ideas, and we went forward, and that's where some of the other studies come from, which for me, the fun part now is publishing the studies and learning more, and still being engaged in projects. I look back at this, I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily the first person that was intrigued to think that managers can coach, train, develop, because there's a lot of taxonomies that say this. But my thing was, what does that mean? What does it look like? Why would it
Mm.
be done?
Yeah.
If you give me a taxonomy and say, oh, managers are supposed to, develop their own people, they're supposed to train them, they're supposed to coach them. I was like, what does that look like? What do they actually do if they're going to do these things? And so I was inspired not only by Peter Senge, in terms of his ideas about the leader's new work, and Orth Ben Fari and Wilkinson and Everett and Selman, because they back in the day in the 80s said, managing is a lot of, at the heart of it is also coaching, and coaching's a core part of it. And they had a lot of the skill sets, about asking questions, providing feedback, and all that kind of stuff. But I thought, okay, I want to see if it's alive and well in research. And I want to talk to people who are doing this to see, is this what they're doing, and how they're doing it. So for me, there is a base there, but it was nice to maybe add the micro behaviors and extend it on a little bit more in terms of, what brings these coaching events or interactions, what's the catalyst for them, what happens as a result of them. So I kind of was on a mission to really dig a lot deeper, maybe. And so I don't take credit for very much, other than what I was able to do when, and hoping adding more building blocks to this.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. You also talked about the belief clusters, and that our behaviors are fueled by our beliefs. Would you mind talking a little bit about those beliefs that
Sure.
you found?
In fact, I have a best table, and I think it's a really nice summary tool, because for me, I was really intrigued, like, why are you doing this? Like, when you did this, what were you thinking, and why did you do this? And it was interesting to me because it kind of had the three clusters, and the beliefs about roles were really this notion of, I really develop people. That's what I'm doing. Like, yes, I manage, and managing is one thing, and it's a necessary thing, but I also develop people, and I value people, and coaching is all about people and helping them to learn and develop. And there is a difference. I mean, a lot of the managers, in the study that I did, saw coaching and managing on like ends of a continuum, and the need to get better at moving towards a coaching paradigm over time. And so, I can distinctly remember one manager saying, yeah, you know what, there are moments when I have to put my manager hat on. I don't like doing it because it's a whole different mindset, and it's more about me being in control, more about me making the decisions and having the authority. That's not where I want to be. And I hope I don't have to be there if I can coach my employees and help them to become more kind of self-sustaining, more empowered, and learn. Those instances of having to be in that directive managerial role might be less. And that's what the goal was, is to move into a pattern of where the coaching mindset becomes the way they actually manage. Because they actually thought management was just about telling people what to do, whereas coaching was very, very different. And then in order to do this, I said, well, in order to execute this kind of way of thinking and to be really good at what you do, what makes it happen? And it was this idea of about their capabilities and their caring for other people. And I remember one manager said, employees can sniff out someone when they're not being authentic, and they know when, you don't really care about them. So caring about people enough to help them authentically is important. And knowing you can do something, you have something to add to the party. You have experiences, you have capabilities, you have skill sets that you can employ to help do this work matters. Um, and then also critical is trust. And I know there's a lot more research, and I haven't even tapped into some of the more recent articles that have come out about the coaching relationship piece. And that's huge. The notion of trust and relationship building is huge. And they spoke about this, and they talked about, getting to know your employees well, so you can help them do really well. And then the other category was about, what do we believe about learning, right? What about the process of learning? And again, critical to that would be the behavior that emanated from this belief that it's about feedback. Providing feedback is really important. And that the learning should be tied to the work. People are going to learn through doing, and they're going to learn through, making mistakes, and they're going to learn from this connection. And so the learning should be integrated with what they're actually doing. And And again, this notion of, learners have to take responsibility. We can't be the people that, just pour all the information into a deep funnel that funnels down into a worker's brain, that the employees have to take responsibility for their learning. They have to care about learning, which then kind of fostered beliefs about what's learning, and they would always say it's ongoing, it's really important, and it's shared. Learning is something that's shared. And then beyond learners, what do you think about your learners? What do you think about the coaches you're coaching? And the notion that people are capable, like they can be coached. I mean, I know we probably all have examples of uncoachable people, perhaps, um, but the mindset was, I believe people are capable, and with feedback, they become more capable. And with other approaches to their growth and development and learning, they can become very, very capable. And this idea that they have to be willing to learn. Like I think one person said to me, in the absence of wanting to be coached, coaching isn't going to be possible. Like you have to want to be coached, you have to be open to it in order for this relationship to work. And the idea that, there's a foundation of information that's often needed. So building blocks have to exist for employees or coachees. And then the other one, which ties in quite a bit, is the understanding of the whys. If you help people understand the why, that helps them to do better. That helps them to kind of think about other questions that they might have to ask of themselves. So these beliefs, if I look at them now and I think about them, there's there are ties to the behaviors. Like in one of them, and when we did Beth's paper, because she examined behaviors as well as belief, and we thought we had to help people understand the behaviors so they would understand, what was driving the behaviors. And we have a lot of, resonance across these. But it makes me think about the fact that there is a lot of consistency, and you can kind of say, if someone believes this, you see it, actually, the proof is in the pudding. You see it kind of come out in how they behave, and then the outcomes that are then garnered at the end of the coaching intervention, or the coaching, conversation, you might call it too. And
Yes,
as I said, I'm not the only person that has done this. There's work by Campbell and Evans that have explored beliefs. There's a gentleman, and I'm not going to pronounce his name correctly, I don't think, but it's Misionkounos, who's done some work in this. And then, Beth just added nicely to this piece. And I think there's a lot still here that needs to be explicated, because I do think we're driven to do things based upon the mindsets we have. And there's a lot of interesting ways that this could, I think, be progressed. And I'd love to, know what more is being done, and what people are thinking about this. But I just remember a quote years ago that, they're the underpinning of how we behave and think, and everything emanates from that. Now I know other people might not necessarily resonate with that way of thinking, but it became, kind of foundational for me to think about that. If I'm going to look at behaviors, I want to know, where did these come from and what inspired them to behave in this way. So that got me down that line of research query.
yes, and I know that everyone on the line would be definitely resonating with you with those beliefs that you've described, Andrea. So thank you. And again, as you say, the beliefs translate into the behaviours. So I'm sure everyone's definitely resonating with the behaviours as well. If we might pick up your research with Dr. Beth Adele from Oklahoma City University, you mentioned that a couple of times. I'm just thinking that perhaps we can touch on that, and then I'd be really keen to hear your tips, your further words of wisdom, because our time that we scheduled together is coming to a very fast end, and I don't want it to end. But I would really be keen to hear about the work you did with Beth, because in particular, this was coming from the perspective of the coachee. So far we've talked about the coach behaviours, beliefs, the background research there, but this more newer research just released this year was around the perspective of the coachee, which is something that's not been done before. So perhaps you could share some of the insights from that research as well.
And I have to say, and a lot of the research now is getting kind of more widely disseminated from my doctoral students, and also doctoral students of colleagues who were researching coaching, for which I was on their doctoral committee. So that's kind of a cool thing. There's a lot more going on from the UT Tyler coaching community. But I have to say, when Beth came into the program at the University of Texas at Tyler, I remember her saying, I'm really intrigued with the idea of coaching up. In other words, can a coachee actually be also a coach of their manager? I don't always want to think of coaching as like a top down or a tiered, only the manager can coach. Like, what can happen if a coachee coaches up? Is that possible? And what would it look like? And then I think also, her philosophy is, if I develop you, I develop myself. So she had a very, very, I know, interesting approach, because she really believed in the possibilities of this connection. And when she did her dissertation research, again, she was interested in asking very similar questions that I had asked a number of years earlier, but they were not only directed at the managers, who were also exemplars in her study, but they were also directed at the coachees. So, for
Mm.
example, and this became really at times confusing, we'd have to say, okay, what set of data are we actually looking at here? Because, for example, she would maybe ask a manager to talk about, and again, one of the things that we thought about is that she interviewed the managers and the employees separately, which was good. But I think, had we had more time, and if we were to do it over, and it would extend the length and time of her immersion in her study, we would then do a collaborative interview with both. So even though it was a
Mm.
dyadic perspective, they were separate when interviewed, and we'd love to see them together to be interviewed, and because I think that would help a lot more regarding the relationship and this coaching up and down, if you will. And so she would say, okay, for managers, tell me about a time when you really helped facilitate the learning of your employee. Manager would say that. She would then go to the employee, tell me about a time when your manager facilitated your learning. And again, what did you learn? How did you learn? What did your manager do? So she had perspectives of all facets of the coaching process from both parties. And she even said to the employees, when she'd say, okay, imagine, you tell me a time when you actually thought you coached your own manager. What did you do? What did it look like? What brought it about? What happened? Why'd you do it? So it was really interesting, because I think the majority of research has always been, what's the recipient of the coaching getting out of this? Not so much of, in a way, what does the coach get out of this? Because her research kind of addressed that shortcoming. Why do managers do this? And what are the benefits to managers in serving as coaches, as well as those receiving the coaching? But also, what do each perceive the other to be doing when they're coaching? And what was really interesting about her work is that I think it has a lot of corroboration in terms of behaviors, in terms of mindsets and outcomes, and the benefits of having a coachy perspective is important. And I know I didn't read it yet, but I know there's another article that's looking at a kind of a coachy perspective, and maybe focuses a little bit on some of the power dynamics. And I haven't quite gotten to that one yet, but so there's a little bit more coming out looking at the employee perspective as coachee. And I think she did a very nice job here of bringing that perspective. And I know that, there are other people. I talked with two gentlemen in Sweden some number of years ago. They emailed me and said, hey, you know what, is it possible? Like, you don't think it's just one-way transmission, do you? And I said, no, I think you can coach up, and I have somebody looking at this, and they looked at it, and it was fascinating. So that was what kind of her articles, and she's done two. One looks at the outcomes of managers, the benefits that they get from serving as coaches, which are numerous, and then also this beliefs and behaviors piece. And so it's a really nice, I think, a really nice write-up, and it's a really good reference tool, because she does do a lot of wonderful tables that kind of give you a historical perspective.
Yes, absolutely. And so there's a couple of things in the research which are really fascinating, as you mentioned, Andrea. One is that managers receive benefits. So we do this coaching because we want to serve others, but acknowledging that in that we also benefit through our own growth and learning. And then, as you say, from the coachee's perspective, what are they learning? How are they growing and developing through the coaching up process as well?
Mm-hmm.
So lots to read. And yes, the tables are wonderful for those that want to really dig into the detail. So I'm conscious of our time, and I hate to say this because I just want to talk all day. But we were going to talk about the impediments to coaching and perhaps some of the other research, the more recent research around uh, the need for organizational support. But perhaps I can turn your attention to those words of wisdom and what you'd like to share with us as we unfortunately start to wrap up our time together.
Well, and that tells me that I probably talked way too much, and
No,
shared
not
maybe
at
too many
all, not at all.
stories, which I could talk forever too. So,
Yeah, of
but,
course.
and again, I would say, and I was chuckling because I thought, well, there's probably more words of wisdom in Melbourne, Australia, and other parts of the world than there is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, with me tonight. But I guess a couple things that resonate with me is, and I don't know where this is all going. With the AI and all the tools that are available, and what that means for the work of employees and managers. Because I had one manager that I spoke with not long ago, and she said all of our employees are required to run all of their proposals and their work through ChatGPT, I think 4.0.
Mm.
And she said, an employee brought something to me, and I found immediately a few mistakes, and I just sent it back and said, don't deliver this to me. You're wasting my time. And I was really struck because I thought, wow, would that have been a moment of feedback maybe, or what I was really
Mm.
struck because I thought, you know what, at what point do we not teach people basic things that they need to know because we're relying on software to do it for them? And at what point what does that mean? So I was really struck by that. And I know it's a performativity tool, and I know a lot of performance time is being expedited here with these tools, but it made me think about the human factor and the importance of relationships involved in coaching, and particularly managerial coaching. So I really think that's a big thing. And I think, and it ties back into Sam's work, who looked at organizational, perceived organizational support, POS. And the idea is that most of us, our first link is our manager, and frontline supervisor, whatever that might be. And that person often dictates why we stay at an organization, why we leave an organization, and how we think about the organization. And what was key in his research was, most managers are kind of the agent that the employee starts to think about. Do I feel supported? Am I getting what I need? Do I feel cared about? And those perceptions really impact how they think about the organization. And ultimately, it probably impacts why they choose to stay and how they do their jobs and other things. But he really wanted to know if that made a difference. To the extent they felt that they were getting coached by their more senior managers, did that impact their engagement, and did it impact how they felt about the organization? So I kind of think that's really key. And I do think that managers play a really critical role, and I think they always will, depending upon how things change. I think there's a lot of tools that can be used, but not all tools are always the best tools to use. So it made me think about the human factor a lot, and the relationship factor. There have to be good, trusting, authentic relationships involved, I think. The other one, and I see this as part of the ICF, foundational guidelines, is, be committed to your own learning and development. Like I said, I love learning new things, going to webinars, listening, learning, and then figuring out how can I be better? How can I take this and do something with it? And of course, I know and would assume that many of our like-minded colleagues feel the same. Um, I also think one of the challenges is, and it was on a project that I was working with 3 other colleagues, where like sometimes academia lags behind the world of practice. And what is it that could happen where we could collectively come together and actually really address serious issues and really make some impact together? And so I think, many of you are in the professional world of coaching and doing this kind of work, whether it's, as managers, whether it's as in internal coaches, team coaching, whatever that case might be. You have experiences and you have insights, and you have stories to tell. So the good, the bad, and the ugly could help improve coaching practice. And I think research partners are really important. And I say that because I keep thinking, I got into this because I saw something that was missing for me in practice, and kind of came up with a stream of research that's kind of lasted a long time. But I'd be really curious to come at it the other way and say, what are the most pressing things that practitioners in the realm of coaching and managerial coaching really need or are thinking about, because then there could be partnerships that make it all impactful. And again, I think there's just so much work that can be still done. I remember writing over 4 iterations of an updated chapter in a handbook that, we were initially at our infancy. Now we're kind of at adolescence and maybe moving to maturity, kind of like a child develops over its span of its life, or I've developed as I'm heading to 60. But I think that there's a lot that can be done. And I think that the more that is done, that establishes the efficacy, the benefits, and the outcomes, we have a base of literature that can be used as well, not only to inform practice, but then hopefully the practice informs the research. So that's kind of where I think there could be a lot of synergies going on here. And I'd love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that definitely resonates with me as well. I've been told by my supervisors to yes, you've got the practice, but what is the research saying? So that lovely, and where did we come from in terms of the research? That lovely blend, I think I absolutely resonate with you from that regards. Thank you. Well, Andrea, thank you so much. We're really grateful, first of all, for all the research that you've done that's laid out the foundation for everything that we do today. So that's the first thing I want to say. But I'm also grateful for your time, the stories that you share. It feels like we've got an insight into where we've come from, but also where we're going in terms of coaching and the coaching industry. And I'm sure everyone's grateful for the research, the beliefs, the behaviours, the mindsets that you've shared with us today. So on behalf of the alumni, I want to really thank you so much for the time that you've shared with us today, and your thoughts and your insights.
And thank you so much.
And I hope that you continue, because we can all continue to benefit for many, many years into the future as well.
Well, I must tell you, I apologize if I overwent my time limit, because I would have loved to hear more and learn more from everyone out in this virtual world about what they're doing and what other issues need attention. So, feel free always to share the chat with me, and I'd love to engage. I love to talk about this work and engage with other people about it. So I apologize if you had things in the chat that I haven't been able to even look at. And thank you for listening and being here today. And I really hope you have a fabulous couple of days. There's a lot of fascinating work being done in practice and in research. So, and Natalie, I can't thank you enough. You were a gracious host and have been more than generous with your compliments. My husband says, "Does she really, really know you?" And I said, "Well, I said, she's very, very kind." I said, "You might have a different opinion, but she thinks I'm all right." So I really appreciate your gracious connections and communications with me, and for this wonderful invitation.
You're very welcome. And yes, tell your husband that we here in Australia and all around the world think that you're all right. Absolutely. Oh, that's wonderful. And all of the wonderful
Well,
thank
I
yous and
sincerely
comments.
wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.